So I guess this is the second part of our interview. I'm actually not sure which way this will go up, which one will go up first. Yeah. But probably the biggest thing I want to speak to you about was the IRGC, of course, Iran, and how then they have influence into both Hamas, Hezbollah, and other areas around the globe as its arms stretch out. And this is one of the myths about this war, is that it's Israel v Hamas or Israel v Hezbollah. It is much wider than that I don't think people may understand.
Much wider than Israel versus someone. Yeah, it's you can take it to so many levels, directions, wherever you want. But I think if we remember that Iran's primary goal, or two goals, is to make sure the regime is safe, let's say it like this, the regime is safe, and the other one is to what they call export the revolution. Making sure these ideology, these values are being exported first upon Iran, which already happened, then to the Middle East, and from there to wherever they can. So looking at this, you understand that it's a long, very long marathon. That's how Iran perceives it. That's why it is taking its time. It's 40 years now since the revolution, 43 years, 44 years, right? 40, or actually 45.
40, yeah.
And they're still in the process, and there's going to be another 45 before they even get halfway. They know it, and that's how they act. They're not running anywhere. And so making sure this revolution is exported goes hand in hand with making sure the regime is safe. Now, the way Iran perceives Israel and the US, and the West in general, is the biggest enemy. For them, the US is the big devil, Israel is the smaller devil. Israel is a colonial branch, colonizer of Israel that been established and funded and supported by the US, by England, by the West. And as such, it needs to be removed. But we are very strong in their eyes. We are very strong. And in order to make sure the regime is safe, and we are not going to take down the regime, you need to make sure that the war is not being held on their borders. Meaning, Iran is very sensitive to border issues, border threats, interfering in its affairs within the country, and it does whatever it can to push it out. You see it by them building proxies in Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, Sudan, Eritrea, Algeria, Libya, Western Sahara, Pakistan, Afghanistan, wherever they can influence and make sure that you push away the threats from Iran's border outside. That's where they're going to be. So that's how Iran is trying to maneuver the region and try to pursue its goals. And we see it actually happening since the 80s, since the beginning, very short time after the revolution. Iran already came in to Syria and Lebanon and started working. In Lebanon, it started or helped start the Hezbollah terrorist organization. It's not the only reason. It's not that it had other factors, other inner Lebanese, inner Shiite processes that happened in Lebanon, but Hezbollah was there with the support of Iran because Iran understood what's going on, understood that she could take advantage of the situation, and they built this amazing force. At the beginning, when Israel was in South Lebanon, there were a bunch of militants just occasionally blowing some IED, shooting from rooftops. It was very, very random. And through time, they built this force, which today has the biggest artillery force, maybe the biggest in the world, definitely more than most of the European countries. Okay, so that's Lebanon. Same process is happening already in Syria, taking advantage of the Syrian civil war since 2011. They build a huge infrastructure starting from Iraq, from Al Bukamal border crossing in Deir ez-Zor region, And they have several routes, I'll send them to you later, going into Damascus, Aleppo, Daraa, and from there, from Damascus in the northern parts, to Lebanon, making sure Hezbollah is being well trained, well funded, they're getting the weapons they need, and they have the availability and the ability to go from place to place without being interrupted. Same thing happened in Iraq after the US invasion, which led to very fundamental changes in Iraq. From a country with a Shiite majority, or at least half the population is Shiite, and the regime was Sunni, the US came and said, kicked the Sunni regime out and placed the Shiites in government and replaced the army, manpower and such, and Iran took advantage of this. Same thing happened in Yemen, and through crisis, Iran managed to entrench itself in different countries, and through resistance groups and stuff like that. And what we assess is, and what we see in the field, whatever Iran has, it gives to its proxies. And there's some sort of a food chain. So if you have Iran on top and the IRGC who run things in Iran, they are on the top of the food chain. You have beneath it, you have Hezbollah, and then maybe Iraq and Yemen, and then you have Syria, and somewhere in the bottom you have Hamas and PIJ. Now we need to remember that all these forces I talked about are predominantly Shiite, or at least led by Shiite forces. Whether it's Hezbollah or forces in Syria or Yemen, which are different kind of Shiites, but still they're Shiites, Hamas and PIJ are Sunni. That's a major difference, but still we have a joke here in Alma. We say that Israel, if you remember Nokia used to have a slogan, Israel is like Nokia. We are connecting people. Okay, so for that cause of fighting Israel, making sure Iran is not threatened or you can try and destroy Israel, it's okay to cooperate. We see it, Iran is funding Hamas and PIJ and other groups heavily. They train them. We know of a lot of terrorists go into different training camps. They supply them with weapons, whatever they can bring through the tunnels in Sinai. And they provide them with ideological and diplomatical, if you will, support, and in other means. Now, everything I just talked about, you can multiply, and that's how you get to what's going on in Lebanon today or the Houthis in Yemen. That's a bit of background on what's going on today. And what else is interesting?
My question in this, I guess, to relate to other work that I do, is then how Russia is influencing this. Because of course we've seen Russia and Iran not only have a friendly relationship, but then have a growing relationship. And like you speak about Iraq, that we, when I say we, I'm meaning America, NATO, the West as a whole, if you will, we have helped push this as well. That, like maybe in Iraq, maybe in other areas around the world, and then sanctioning Russia. I'm not saying then sanctioning Russia was the wrong thing to do, but that does, of course, push it to rely on other allies. Therefore, we've pushed them closer together. This is where a lot of these decisions are you one step forward, two steps back, maybe in some things. So where does that sit, and what maybe technology that we have seen share between Russia and that increase that we could see flow down the river to these elements as Hezbollah, Hamas, PIJ, things like this?
So Iran-Russia relations, it's not always been as good as we see it now. Russia has been in the Middle East since the 50s, mainly in Syria and Egypt. Then, let's say since the 50s, 60s, Syria is its main stronghold in the Middle East. They have their own ports there in Tartus, in Khmeimim, in Latakia, and we see it steady since the 50s, actually till the civil war, almost. Iran has been in good relations with Syria, with Assad, the father of Bashar al-Assad, since the 70s, but it hasn't been entrenched like Russia. Now, once the civil war started, Russia and Iran both came help Assad. Different kind of forces were pushed in. In Russia, we saw actually Russian forces. Iran-wise, we saw Hezbollah, we saw Afghani and Pakistani militias. We see other forces coming from within Syria, but not a lot of Iranians. Okay, Iran didn't send its army much like Russia. And then started kind of, it's not a battle, but they tried to fight over control inside Syria, and obviously different contracts and resources within Syria. Rebuilding Syria is a multi-billion project, which already started, and both countries are competing. Syria has natural reserve elements that's good for both of them, and it's called a growing market. Okay, Syria is going to need electricity, oil, commodities, which both countries are willing to produce. And at some points we saw actually a struggle between them, where Russia is trying to push Iran from different places and vice versa. But an interesting thing, I mean, it's very generally speaking, yeah. But since the Ukraine war started and Russia in need for more weapons and more support, we see a shift in change and in events, and Russia is now actually coming to Iran to buy weapons. If a lot of the weapons we know Iran has, a lot of its missiles, cruise missiles, submarines, jet planes, helicopters are originated from Russia, got into Iran from various sources, but are Russian. Now we see a shift, change in roles, and now Iran is supplying Russia with different kind of UAVs. We've seen the Shahid 236, 238. We know of missiles, cruise missiles, and different. I think they even talked about Iran send Russia S-300 systems because it needed some. In terms of how we see it in the field, well, since they're working together, I think the first cooperation that was visible was upgrading the Shahid 236, making it lighter maybe, or different materials, anti-jamming antennas that came from Russia, and stuff like that. But we know that this cooperation goes back into Iran, guidance system for rockets, composite materials for rockets and for different ships, whatever. And all of this weapon system and knowledge and expertise that are getting into Iran are then being exported to its proxies. So again, seeing this ability of the Houthis to launch an anti-ship ballistic missile, I think it's an ability maybe 2 or 3 countries in the world has. This ability didn't come only from Iran. Okay, there's a lot of expertise, a lot of knowledge that came from Russia and from other countries like North Korea and China. And in that sense, at the beginning we talked about Israel-Hamas war or Israel-Hezbollah war, and then we said, oh, maybe it's an Israel-Iran war. Now we see it's a much broader axis. It's China, North Korea, Russia, Iran, and its proxies versus basically what we call today the West.
Yes.
You see it even in other dimensions like the BRICS being formed as sort of a counterweight to the G7 organization. And we see a lot of oil transactions, a lot of other commodity deals are being done not necessarily through dollar, not paid by American dollars, but Chinese money, Indian money, ruble, and other ways. And so it's a multi-dimension process that's going on today. And I'm not sure all of the people that are talking about Israel versus Hamas know the bigger picture of what's going on.
Yeah, and this is something that I've been speaking about, I guess, since the very beginning of this. And I think some people thought I was crazy. And I was like, well, my subject matter is Ukraine, Russia. And I do a hell of a lot of reading in especially things like the Mitrokin archive and all these KGB stuff that has come out that has been declassified since the fall of the Soviet Union. But you can look at what they were doing in their intelligence operations, asymmetrical campaigns, and you can just copy paste that to what the FSB, SVR are doing.
Iran is doing the same, basically.
And well, this is what I see is that Russia, I don't think that Russia gives 2 shits about Gaza, but what they see is the global order of what Russia or China want is division in the West and a multipolar world existing
exactly.
away from the West and America at the helm. And this is what they're trying to push. And I think that the Ukraine war, and especially here, has exacerbated this forward decades.
I think it's the same in many ways. Israel and Ukraine are fighting the same front, are fighting the same war. Again, let's say they're fighting the same war in different fronts, but it's part of the same effort that you just mentioned that is not held by or not headed by Hamas or Hezbollah, but much greater forces.
Yeah. Well, and this is like we've seen with, you bring up about the Houthi rebels and the how much more success they're having in high-tech weapons that are going down. And if you look at, okay, what is the consequence of what they're doing, and then the insurance lifting on the ships, or the ships having to take a longer route, who benefits from this? And then you look at other pipelines around the world, or where ships are coming into St. Petersburg and going around.
What kind of maritime companies are?
Exactly. You look exactly at this and which companies are being hit and which ones are not. You start to, I guess, piece together this idea. And do you think, because in my belief, the asymmetrical campaign in the south, in areas such as, Middle East, you're talking Africa, areas like this, I actually think that let's call it the Russian asymmetrical campaign, but of this axis of evil, as people have put it, I actually think they're having a lot more success in a lot of these countries than we are with their operations. I
think if we look at what's going on in Africa, for instance, that US and France are being kicked out, and you don't see, at least not in the media, much fighting back. Let's call it pretty much rolling on their back and saying, okay, I'm leaving. And just yesterday, the US signed the last part of the deal of leaving Niger, if I remember, Niger or one of these countries, and Russia came in. But who also is coming in is Iran. And both these countries see the US and England and Canada's, Australia's reaction, and they're not seeing much of it. And for them, it's like a go-ahead for keeping doing what they also already do. And I think if we're looking at Houthis right now, and remember they're backed by Iran, I think there's been 2 or 3 interesting developments in the past, let's say, 2 months that been brought up to surface. One is Iran, one of Iran's biggest warships. It's actually a converted tanker being converted into a warship. Its first operational cruise was around Straits of Malacca, which is one of the most important straits in the world, much like Hormuz and Red Sea. And that's like declaring, and they passed near an American base. And they also said it, like it was a 40-day cruise. We passed in Straits of Malacca and we saw the American base. So that's one. And the second one is Iran supporting the Polisario in Western Sahara, which is less than 1,000 kilometers from the Gibraltar Straits. And also other forces in Algeria and Libya in the Mediterranean. And they also stated that they want to have control or presence in the Panama Canal, which already have presence in South America, especially in Venezuela, and in the tri-borders between Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, this area, through the IRGC and Hezbollah. So you see they're positioning themselves in critical choke points of the world. And I wouldn't be surprised if we'll see them operating in the not so far future, let's say in Gibraltar, trying to block. Now it's Israeli connected ships, but it's actually global shipping from entering Gibraltar, from exiting Gibraltar. And it's going to be very interesting. And it is supported by Russia. I mean, Russia says it supports this operation, and I think they even stated lately that if a war between Iran and Israel is to break out, they're going to support Iran.
Well, by all indicators would be that they would be. And what sort of tactics are they using in these countries to, I guess, get the people on board? I know Africa can actually be a lot easier for Russia than a lot of other places, just due to the history there. That you look at the the history of the English or the French or many other nations into Africa and enslavement and colonialism and all of this. And Russia doesn't really have the history there that a lot of countries do.
Yeah.
So this idea of, to use a slang term, I guess, of Russophobia that the West may have doesn't actually exist as much in Africa. So they have actually a lot easier time there for influence.
Yeah, and they usually, from what I saw so far, is, again, it's not my field of expertise, but from what I read, they usually use military generals or stuff like that. I guess there's a lot of money going in through, and they use them to control the country. But what I can tell you about the way Iran, for instance, how it works in other parts of the world, it usually works in two parallel axes, let's call it. One, they get in with a lot of civilian projects. For instance, in Syria, they build schools, they build mosques, a lot of charity funds, they build water infrastructure, they help rebuild houses, stuff like that. Through these funds and these operations, you doctrinate the population. Sometimes you try to convert them into Shia. But what it mostly does, it makes the population favorable of this, of their presence. Afterwards, when you bring the militia members, the weaponry and stuff like that, it looks okay because they're already here. They helped us. They're better than Assad or from other regimes. Yeah. And that's how they work, a lot through the civilian infrastructure. The second one is, again, using crisis to bring military operatives in. Doesn't necessarily has to be Iranian. In Syria, they used Iraqi, Pakistani, Afghani, and Lebanese militia. Okay, none of them Irani. And they use it to create strongholds and take over places. And again, a lot of money being funneled in to help lubricate this whole process of taking over the country. We see it in Yemen, where they help the Houthis. We see it in Syria, where they helped Assad. Lebanon, obviously. And it's a process that gains from other people's suffering, much like in Africa with Russia.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, these countries you list off of where Iran is working, the exact same ones where Russia, and especially you see Russia's private military group of Wagner PMC working, who of course have a lot to do with the Russian military intelligence, the GRU, as well. So you can sort of see these pieces of the jigsaw coming together and how this is happening. But you can see how successful this can be, because we're not doing it. You know, if say in Syria, if you go somewhere where people don't have running water, they don't have electricity, their house has been blown up, and you offer them, we'll build you a school and your house, and you'll have electricity, you'll have water, and you gradually this, this is great, and then you bring in some tanks, and no one cares.
That's exactly what we say here about Lebanon, that Lebanon is not functioning as a country. No running water, no electricity. If someone needs anything in South Lebanon, they go to Hezbollah. Yeah. And when you get these kind of services, like you just said, and a week later, a month later, a year later, a guy nice like you walks in and he asks for the keys for your basement or for your rooftop, you know what's going on. You're not really asking questions. Sometimes you don't really have a choice, but you know what's going on, and he's going to use your basement. Same thing happens in other places in the world, and again, it's the same. It's the pieces from the same puzzle, and it's the fact that Russia and Iran, to an extent, Russia are winning this is because the West is not really doing anything, neither to try and stand up against it or operate in other places, in other scenes, in other theaters that might help them. So the West is basically just standing there waiting for something to happen, not really doing much. They may be supporting Ukraine, supporting Israel, but that's it. And you see this influence
growing, and it's very easy to put a Western. You and I spoke about this both offline and in the interview before. It's very easy to put a Western mindset on. I wouldn't do that. But you're in a country where you have running water that you can drink, and you've got a school, and you've got relative safety, and this and that. It's very easy to then look upon it and go, I wouldn't do that. But then if you are in a community or an area where it's not safe, you don't have running water, you don't have a school, you don't have hope, you can see exactly why this is happening. And we had the exact same when I was in Afghanistan. We had a patrol up to this. We called him General Sharif, I believe his name was, but he was known as the Butcher of Kabul. Bad guy, not a good guy by any means. But this certain valley area, he ran the whole thing. And to get safe passage through,
You had to talk to him.
we had to talk to him, and we had a meeting with him, and these US choppers rocked up, who I'm guessing were probably CIA to give him a bag of cash. We were just there for security in our vehicles. But it was that none of these people in this valley, no one will end up on our side. He has come here and given them water and schools and food and this
Exactly.
and that. They love him, but he's the
someone's
only thing
taking
stopping
care
the
of your
Taliban
kid.
coming in.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like we
They
spoke
build
about your family
hospitals,
before.
they give them schools, they give them summer schools,
Yeah.
they're taking care of your kids. That's it for you.
Yeah.
Like the same metaphor not metaphor, but when we talked about my kids or their kids, if you're taking care of my kids, I'm rooting for you. That's it. It's very simple.
There's also been, from my reading through some other think tanks, a large emphasis put on, especially from the Russian SVR, I believe, in intelligence campaigns and information campaigns about painting the West as, a slang term that they use, at least on Telegram, is the globo homo. To paint the West as this sexually obsessed, non-nuclear family, sort of ultra woke idea of the West. And of course that appeals to these very conservative countries, that then they're like, well, we don't want anything to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a pushing of that information to demonize the West and to show, well, look at, say Russia or Iran as this, where these Russia say, as they will paint the bastion of European values, or Iran may paint the bastion of these certain values. Do you see that flowing in as well in the informational war?
The first thing that comes to mind is taking this campaign and now taking movements like Gays for Palestine and trying to, it really...
Mate, it's my favourite. It's one of my favourite things. There's a protest where someone has a big flag with Iran written in the rainbow flag.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that doesn't annoy me. But fuck, it would annoy Iran, the same people you're trying to support.
No, but you already see clips of like, let's call them woke people from all range of wokeness trying to protest pro-Iran, pro-Russia, pro-whatever. And Russians and Palestinians, whatever, they're coming and say, no, I don't want to protest with you. We're not together. We're not the same.
Yes.
And they do not understand, like I'm talking about the woke people, they do not understand the difference between supporting human rights in a different place and the reality of this place, which doesn't necessarily come together with what you think. Like you said, you do not live there. It's very hard to understand. And sometimes, even when you know what's going on, you don't completely understand. And even for me, living here 5 minutes from the Lebanese border, it's very hard to understand what it means to be a Shiite in South Lebanon.
Yes.
So...
Well, and like you and I spoke about in the last, we can completely sympathise with how people end up in these groups or in these situations.
I don't know if I can sympathise, but I can understand how they end up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I can completely understand. And I always say, if I was some young lad in Afghanistan who grew up and was filled with that education, and those and then saw me in an armoured vehicle with a machine gun come 12,000 k's away, I'd be like, I'm fighting back against those pricks too. I get it. And it's something that I think that Russia and Iran are having a lot more success than we are. Do you think that may be because these are countries where their leaders are going to be in power for a long time, and it's not every 4 years that they have to get re-elected or get booted out, that they can have a much longer view? Like you speak about Iran at the beginning of, now it's 45 years since the revolution, and that they might have another 45 years until they know some things may happen, that this is a long term. Do you think that these more autocratic nations can think like that when our leaders, at least in Australia, is like, well, in 4 years I've got to
you got to show results.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not going to comment on Russia. I guess it's a part of it. In Iran and in other Muslim countries with that kind of ideological belief, not necessarily Shiite, but the depth of the ideology, the time perception is very different. If you and I try to refer to past events, we'd probably go 10, 20, maybe to Second World War, like 50, 80, 100 years ago if we are very well educated. The Muslim, especially Shiite point of view, if we're talking about Iran, goes back to the days of Muhammad. When they refer to ceasefire, or we see it with Hamas also, they do not talk about ceasefire between Israel and Syria or Israel and Egypt in the 60s or 70s. They're referring to Muhammad's ceasefire with the Jews or with other fighters in the 6th and 7th century, or the other caliphs after him. So in that sense, they also know how to look to the future because they have time. Yeah. They know it's okay, God promised, and it's going to happen. It's not going to happen in my lifetime, then my kid is going to go in my footsteps. And in Iran, they also say it. It's a long, long race. For them, they have a history. We tend to think about Iran as a 45-year-old theocracy or whatever. But it's actually, they perceive themselves as an 4,500 years empire with very rich, very vast cultural, military-wise, of cultural military history, and a different language. The way they perceive the Middle East is a result of colonialism. For them, they are an original, let's say, nation that's existed for thousands of years. If they look at Syria, they look at Lebanon, if they look at Iraq, it's countries, maybe centuries old, not very cohesive, not very united, doesn't have its own identity, and they're very much artificial, if you will, again, made by the West. So they are kind of condescending, but they also have this very rich history to rely on when looking at the past and at the future. Okay, so again, they have a very different timeline than me and you, than the West. Very different, and that's part of the reason why they act the way they act.
Yeah. The second time I've used this quote today, but the Taliban of, you have the watches, but we have the time.
Exactly, exactly. We are looking at a very shorter timetable.
Yeah.
Might be 20 years, might be 4 years till next election or to the next political crisis. For them, like you said, they're not going anywhere. Khamenei is there till he's dead. His predecessor is going to be there till he's dead, 30, 40, 50 years. It's okay. If we don't achieve it this year, we'll do it next year. It's going to take time, but it's going to happen at the end.
Yeah. And where then because China has a very similar look.
Again, a very ancient country with a very deep and different time perception and a different concepts and the way they perceive the world and the way they perceive China. For them, China is not just the China we know. They look back and where China was. And I don't know, maybe Israel can learn something about it. Maybe Ben Gvir and Smotrich are now bringing something back, the big Israel going all the way to Iraq. I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
maybe we should learn something.
Well, I think this is one of the things the West does poorly is we do not look too far into the future. We look 5, 10 years, nor do we look back. We look back. The world did not start in the First and Second World War, like the Western world. And we need to, sort of check ourselves as well and go, hey, there is more than this. Where does China fit in, I guess, in a tactical aspect to Iran, maybe supply of weapons and training and in this as a wider element?
I think that for China, Iran is a natural partner, trying to combat the American, say, one polar world and in their reach for or aspiration for a multipolar world. Iran is a natural partner, much like China, to an extent even India. But I don't think that Xi Jinping likes Rouhani or Putin. There are tools for them. If tomorrow the Iranian regime is going to fall and there'll be another player, better player, bigger, stronger, I don't know, something that works better for them, he will turn to them. There's nothing, it's not long-term relationship.
There's no ideology shared there. It's the share of a common enemy, not a common...
I don't know if it's even an enemy as much as goals. Iran serves the Chinese goals right now.
Yeah. Well, the goal is to have a multipolar world away from the US running things. So I guess the enemy is the West, if that makes a whole, and the influence of the West. This is why I see it, and that China, Russia, Iran, India, even India to a degree, and many other countries, you can have your proxies in other areas to then fuel all the same goal. And if you're all looking at the same goal, you're friends for now.
I'm not sure Iran and China has the same goal as in Iran wants to take over the world and China just wants to lead it. And China sometimes is a balancing actor in sense of we need the oil prices low and commodities low and the cost and time it takes to ship things. And Iran sometimes is a destabilizer. But for them, it helps destabilize the West. It helps erode the West, and for them, it's a good thing. It helps push the Chinese interest, both in Africa, both in the Middle East, and you could see it in a very. It was very clear in the agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia a couple of years back, I think, when China was the mediator. Because the US was not in such a good relation with Saudi Arabia, China stepped right in. It was very good for them. China has a nice foothold in Africa now. It builds several very important infrastructure in Israel. It has very good relations again with Iran trading oil. So she puts herself in the places that would benefit her now or especially in the future. The Belt and the Road program.
Yeah, and that's more what I was trying to say is that eroding the West is I guess the common goal of this, and the ways about it at the moment I guess line up, whether it's through these proxies of which we're talking about today or other campaigns around the world.
Yeah, exactly what's going on.
And where does this lead, do you think, for somewhere like Israel? That of course Australia is somewhat disconnected. I know China's the major player in our area of the world, and their influence into islands above Australia and into Australia itself. The entire electricity grid in Victoria, a state in Australia, is owned by the Chinese. I believe another one it might be New South Wales is owned as well. And there's a lot of this overtaking of power centres, not by military sense by China. China will always say, we don't invade anyone, we don't do this, we don't do that.
Well, you influence in different ways.
But we buy the port, and we buy all your minerals, and we buy this. And if China pulled out of Australia, Australia's economy would be absolutely shocking. But in a country like Israel that then can't, you're going to have these neighbours.
It's going to be very challenging.
Yeah.
And that's why Israel needs to make sure that, first, we have very good relations with our allies in Europe, in the United States, in Australia, and Canada. But we definitely need to make the world understand it's not Israel's problem. It's a global problem. It's much broader than Israel versus Hezbollah or even Iran. It's a bigger problem. The world's going to wake up one day if it doesn't take care of it and understand that, we're fucked. We're screwed.
Yeah.
Because you're no longer controlling this part of the world called the Middle East and Africa.
Yeah. Well, and incredibly resource rich, incredibly populous, and growing power. Like the power, we pay off the influence that Africa and the Middle East, and this is the problem. And I think a lot of people in the Middle East and Africa have seen is the West treat a lot of people like second-class citizens, as well as don't realise the growing power,
the potential there,
and the potential, and maybe coming to the plate a little late. How much concern, we talk about that, Russia is getting some weapons off Iran, and there's some training both ways and this and that. How much concern is there with Israel, of course, being the regional power here, and that is, a lot of that is based due to Israel's nuclear weapons and deterrent. How much concern is there for then Iran gaining a nuclear weapon? We know that that's one of their primary goals. We've known that for a long time. And of course, they're lining up and they're much closer allies with the largest nuclear power in the world, which is Russia. Is there concern about something being transferred there and stepping them forward a decade in their technology?
It wouldn't blow my mind if that's the case. if Russia is transferring weapons or not weapons, but knowledge and abilities and technology in order to produce weapons. It's definitely a concern for Israel because everything we see now coming from Iran will be multiplied, be much easier for them to do what they do now, but at a much higher volume, let's call it. But at the same time, I'm not concerned that we're going to get nuked tomorrow.
Yeah. But it would change how Israel would have to act in the Middle East, because the thing about nuclear weapons have no tactical significance. They have strategic significance as far as the way you treat a nuclear power is significantly different to the way you treat it.
And the way not Israel would treat it, you would see a shift in balance and shift in relations throughout the Middle East. Yes. Right now, you see Saudis are willing all of a sudden to talk to Iran. Gulf countries are signing deals with Iran. You see India starting to, I think they signed a big contract now on moving train railways through Iran, stuff like that. So you see a lot of shifts in power of balance and stuff like that. That a nuclear bomb will make it even worse. And again, Israel needs to start act like a regional power. The problem, Kissinger once said that Israel doesn't have foreign policy; we only have internal policy.
Yeah,
that's one of Israel's biggest problems. That right now, what we're seeing in Gaza, what we're seeing in Lebanon, is not derived from a big plan, a strategic plan. It's derived from crisis to crisis. I mean, this Ben Gvir now wants to be a cabinet member, so let's do this. And he wants to attack in Lebanon, so no, let's stop him, let's give him money to shut him up. So, and it reflects outside. People understand, like other countries understand that Israel is not in a very good position right now. And Iran also understands it. Yeah. So for them, it's either you do the way I see it. You either continue this war of attrition, making Iran available to weaponize a bomb, or you start a war knowing you're going to lose Hezbollah and proxies, because Israel is not going to be conquered. Yeah, we're gonna pay a lot of prices, heavy prices, but we're gonna end this war as the winners. But the consequence is that probably the next year and a half later, we're not going to be able to attack in Iran.
Yeah.
So it's either this or that. But if Iran wants to gain weapons, now is the time for them. The past almost a year now. Second scenario we can consider is that Iran is not going to weaponize. She's going to be a threshold country, benefiting from it. Like, let's call it extorting the West for whatever it wants. Lifting the sanctions, taking the IRGC out of the terrorist list, stuff like that, while still maintaining this campaign throughout the Middle East against Israel and other forces.
And I guess protected under their allies' nuclear umbrella.
That's an interesting question. What's Russia's take on nuclear Iran? If it's in their best interest or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess it depends on what's going on in Ukraine and what's going on in the States.
Yeah.
That's actually a very good question. What's Russia's take on this?
Yeah. Because that's the thing is I think, and like we spoke about it, Russia's seeing this as a tool. I think if you were to sit down with Putin, cameras off, you'd go, I don't agree with shit there, but no. we can degrade the West through this, and you see that it's
deflecting from Ukraine, from Eastern Europe. You can deflect the attention, the weapons, the money to the Middle East. Very good for Putin.
Yeah, and you can. What you can do is you can then pull up Israel and go, well, look at the campaign being done in Gaza. Look how many people that they've killed. Look at these civilians. Look at this.
Never mind how many we were killed in Ukraine.
Well, we've already seen this. I think it was Medvedev. But don't quote me on that. But one of Russia's senior officials was speaking directly about, last week we killed 25 civilians in Ukraine, and Israel killed by Hamas numbers killed 2,000. And now, of course, very different war zones too. a million Gazas would fit inside of Ukraine as far as just territory based. So it's different, but we can't discount the influence that has on many billions of people around the world seeing this and going, yeah, fuck them. Exactly. Were you here when I said that Sergei Lavrov, and this is the incorrect quote, but to the words of the effect of, and he's Russia's foreign minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, I believe, that he said, if you're that worried about Russia bombing Ukraine, imagine that Ukrainians were Muslim and Russia was America, and suddenly you won't care. Now, he said that as a justification for what they're doing, which is bullshit. But it does ring in a lot of people's ears and go, yeah.
Again, I think if you look at the numbers, not the pictures, Israel, if we're being blamed for genocide in Gaza or West Bank or Palestinians, we're probably the country that did it the worst in human history. If you look at the number of Palestinians in, let's go, 1948, 1860, whenever you want, in that era, till today, it's more than quadrupled. I think it's 10, 20 times fold the population. If you look at the West Bank, I think it's it has most universities per capita in the entire Arab world, more than any other country in the Middle East. Happened under Israeli occupation, genocidal occupation. Yeah. If you look almost in any way you want it, I think GDP in the West Bank and in Gaza, don't quote me on Gaza after the war, but before the war, was higher than most countries in Syria and Lebanon for sure. So when people are working or acting on feelings because they saw something on TV or heard Russian foreign minister talk about if they were Muslims, blah, 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 people need to stop and go look for facts themselves. I mean, when we have groups here and I show them the pictures, I show them the numbers, and I say, you don't have to believe me, just go and check. It's on you. But don't just watch the TV and make your decision based on that, or CNN or BBC. Yeah. Go check the facts. In more than one source, find a reliable one that you count on, and make sure you know what's going on. Because no one talks about more than 500,000 people killed in Syria, 200,000 missing, 6 million people displaced. Yeah. No one talks about what's going on in Yemen, the famine in Yemen, and that's almost a full-on genocide. No one talks about the genocide that's going on in South Sudan. So it's or Eritrea or Somalia. No one talks about it. It's not interesting. No Jews, no news.
But it doesn't also help these information campaigns, and that's why we do. That's why the reason I bring this up is, of course, Russia is pushing this for the information campaign of division in the West, because the West is completely divided over Gaza, completely divided. More so, at least in Australia, from what I see, it's probably 5-1 pro-Palestine. And then it creates division, which is fantastic for China and Russia. Division in the West is fantastic, as well as it adds credibility to then their other campaigns then around the world in other nations. And this whole thing, it plays into this then massively. And this was my thing about Gaza, is tactically Israel will win. Strategically, I think Israel
depends on what we do. Depends on us.
Yeah, short term, strategically we'll lose. Because just look at the UN, look at all these nations at the moment. It'll be very interesting to see what happens in the future. But short term, you've got a few countries backing Israel.
And that's also changing right now. If you see what's going on in France, in England, in Germany, public opinion is now, and the political system is now pointing in the other direction. But in that sense of what Israel can do, I think it's very limited. Because if you take superpowers like China and Russia, and you take regional powers with 90 million people like Iran, which is devoting most of its money to these campaigns in the Middle East, and then you take a country of around 9 million people, if you take the Arab population into play, 9 million people, and now you need to fight, it's a lost battle.
Yeah.
So again, it goes back to the same point of it's not just an Israeli problem. People need to understand it's a much wider problem. It's their problem also. It's a problem for the protester in New York. First of all, he doesn't know he's a tool in this game, and he doesn't necessarily realize how it's going to affect the rest of his life if he supports these kind of, or continue being a tool in this game, because it's going to change the whole way of life that he knows right now, and apparently likes because he lives in New York. So.
Well, I often say it, I've been saying this, that I'm the biggest Free Palestine campaigner in the world if it's Free Palestine of Hamas.
Definitely.
If that was the campaign, I'd be out there with the flag and the this and the that, because the problem there is Hamas. Now you can look at the problems, and you and I spoke in our last interview about mistakes that have been made, how things could have been conducted better by the IDF, and that. But that with this, you can look at that is a huge problem affecting the many civilians there as well. But I really appreciate this breakdown of, how this is such a bigger issue, because most people are seeing it, it's this terrorist group of a few thousand guys, tens of thousands of guys in this area doing this, and not this, no, there's superpowers behind this.
Yeah, definitely.
And we are in the age of proxy war. I don't believe we'll ever see, and if we do, it'll be the end anyway, of major power v major power. It will be done with a level of separation through a proxy. That if someone from Hezbollah here uses a cornet, a tandem cornet against a Merkava and blows it up and kills the crew, no one is saying Russia blew up an Israeli Merkava 4. No one's saying that. Now, it wasn't Russian soldiers who did it, but were they guys who got that through Iran, and that weapon system came to Iran, and there was training and the tandem fire because we have, by the way, trophy system, blah, blah, blah.
We have
That's exactly how it works.
We have this whole chain record of deals like weapon systems that transferred from Russia to Iran with contracts. Iran is later on developing them domestically and produces them to Hezbollah, and we have it. I think a month ago we released a photo of them launching an Almas rocket, which is Iranian reverse engineering of the Israeli spike, and it says Iran 2023. So it's still going on, and same thing with the missiles that we know that are coming from Russia to Iran, and vice versa with drones that are coming. So you really need to look the other way to say we don't know it's happening, but it's very easy for people to say no, it's much more, it's Israel and Hamas, and that's it.
Yeah, and the thing is, we haven't even touched on, and we won't do it to get too long, but is all the ISR assets to intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance that's coming into these elements as well, directly from Russian, Chinese, whatever satellites.
We have a big debate right here in Alma Center about whether China is supplying Iran and later on Hezbollah and Yemenis with satellite imagery and reconnaissance and information, because to an extent, if they do, it's an act of war, basically. And now you need to figure out what you're going to do.
Yeah.
But we haven't really gotten into very decisive conclusions, but we are also only dealing with open source material, so we are very limited in that aspect.
Well, we know that China is supplying Russia a lot of it. We know that. We also know on the other side that we're supplying Ukraine a shitload of it, and the majority of the stuff coming from satellites to Israel is going to be US stuff, or the P-8 Poseidons that fly up and down the coast all the time as well. That we are in. I have said that we will look back, I believe, at this period as actually the Third World War, but we just don't know that we're in it. That it doesn't need to be guns firing to be actually within this, and that we are at an active
low-key Third World War.
It's a cold Third World War, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That it's through these proxy powers doing whatever. And I believe we'll probably see something open in the Pacific at some point, potentially that's Chinese backed.
I really hope not, because that means that whatever happens here is going to be way worse.
Yes.
Because the way we put it is, the more Western involvement we're going to get in Israel and the Middle East in general, making sure we end this conflict, gonna cause less casualties, less damage, and way faster.
Yeah.
If the US gonna say, listen, we don't know what to do it your own way, or if we let Hezbollah start a war, or Iran, it's gonna be way, way worse for all sides. But definitely this war is going to shape this whole area and maybe the whole world for the next few decades.
Absolutely.
So,
well, look, I think that's about everything. Is there anything burning we haven't covered that you thought we must?
no, I think we're good.
I think we got
Just,
there.
I think just the main point about IRGC food chain is that next war with Hezbollah, and it's not an if, it's a when. If it's not going to happen now, it's going to happen in the next 2 years. And before October, we estimated that we're going to have a war with Hezbollah, started by Hezbollah by October, maybe November. So we were looking to Lebanon, and we were correct with the date, but the
Other end.
Yeah, the other end. Whatever we see now in Iranian hands, perhaps even Houthi hands, is going to be activated by Hezbollah. That means anti-ship ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, torpedoes, loitering munitions, some sorts, maybe even mini submarines that are going to hit Israeli ports, Israeli gas rigs, stuff like that. Precise missiles like Fatah 110, which can hit a car in Tel Aviv, and even worse, also aerial defense units that Israel is already taking care of, but obviously we haven't found all of them. But basically whatever Iran has is going to end up in Hezbollah hands. They're also stating it. And we're already seeing some of it in action, like the Almas missile, Cornets, and other Falak rockets that are being used today. So that's important to remember.
Yeah. Well, mate, thank you very much for speaking openly. Honestly, it's great to speak to someone about this because most people think that I'm crazy when I'm saying that we need to open up our picture.
No, you're not crazy. It's definitely there.
Easy. Well, thank you, mate. We appreciate it.
Thank you.